It's a real distinct pleasure to be able to welcome Eva-Marie von Hippel to Toronto and to this event. You'll understand that she's also someone who's just come in for this in the last days, so she is staying awake on our benefit. We thank you very much for taking the time out of a very busy schedule. I know what it's like, and to be able to visit us in Canada, all with the aim of building our rights business between our countries. So welcome, and Eva-Marie von Hippel.
Thank you very much. Is anybody of you kind enough to spare me having to use this phone as an alarm clock that'll stop me after whatever it is, 45 minutes? Will anybody be rude and shout, and your time's up? Good. Very good. I'll put my phone back there. I'm not only jet-lagged and a bit confused, I'm also coming very ill-prepared because one of the benefits of the brave new world is that you totally rely on your computers, and when these computers are malfunctioning, you're in trouble. Our server in Munich in our head offices has been set up, and everybody's been provided with beautiful new desktops and everything. The only problem being that we in Berlin, we are the little appendix in Berlin, are still shut out of the system, so I can't access my data. So all I have is this really interesting pad of notes that I scribbled down last night on the flight from memory. So pardon me if it's a bit confusing and chaotic. I try to be as clear as I can, and if I'm not clear, interrupt me and tell me I'm not making sense, and I'll try to be better. So when I was asked to talk to you about the translation of Canadian literature into Germany, my first thought was, do I really know how many of the Canadian authors are translated? A couple of big names, of course, but then I checked the internet and I found out the ground is pretty much covered. You have a very, very good track record of Canadian authors being translated into German. All your big authors basically are translated into German. So the grounds on which you treat are pretty stable, are well prepared. There has been a long-standing business tradition between Germany and Canada and the publishing market for at least, I would say, 50 years now. The German public is very interested in Canadian writers because they know there is wonderful writing out here and truly great literary writing. It's not only Alice Munro, of course, who's super famous, but also Margaret Atwood. It's David Guterson had a mega seller. Jan Martel had a big bestseller in Germany. And these are only the very literary writers. I know there are much more things in commercial writing. I won't mention it because I'm not a specialist there. To say a couple of words about myself, I checked for your sake. I've been working in publishing since 1992, ever since I'm an editor. I started out as a paperback editor. I did that for 10 years, roughly. And then I moved to being a publisher for commercial hardcover fiction at Rowohlt for a couple of years, 4 or 5 years. And then I decided this was all getting very boring, and I decided for a second career in literary publishing, and that's what I've been doing ever since 2006. And I've basically worked for 2 houses. That's Dumont Publishing in Cologne, and then Pieper in Munich. And because Berlin Verlag is an imprint of Pieper, I'm now in Berlin. They sent me there to rebuild the list. What we do at Berlin Verlag is, let me start differently. Historically, Berlin Verlag was founded in 1995 by 2 young editors from Frankfurt, Elisabeth Ruger and Arnulf Conradi. Some of you might know them. They thought that after the wall coming down in Berlin, Berlin needed to become a center of German publishing again. They were the first to think so. They were the first to go there and to found a new house, and they did this really brilliantly and with a lot of aplomb and a lot of success initially. And then the usual financial troubles came, with the result of the house being sold to Random House, being bought back from Random House, being sold to Bloomsbury. Then by then, first Arnulf, then Elizabeth left the house. The house was sold off by Bloomsbury to the Bonnier Media Group and made an imprint of Pieper, and that's where we are now historically. So, as I told you, we're just the tiny little appendix of Bonnier Media Group in Berlin. We are supposed to be the beautiful flower. We can the icing on the cake, the literary icing on the cake. We are in the lucky situation that we don't need to earn money. We don't need to make money. We're just not allowed to lose money. We're a staff of 5 people. We publish a list of roughly 24 to 28 books a year, half of it being nonfiction, and the fiction is divided by national and international fiction. So in a really great year for international fiction, I'll publish 12 books. Because that's my my resort, and I'm the only person doing that. So everyone from Taiwan, from Finland, from Iceland, and from Canada must get in touch with me and persuade me to that it's their book I really need to publish in 2021 or 20 or 19. So the bottleneck you have to pass is pretty slim. We have a couple of household names I want to mention to you, because maybe that's helpful to let you know what kind of literary fiction we do. For this I need my glasses, because otherwise I'll forget the most important ones. James Salter is one of them, Raymond Carver, Richard Ford, no longer ours, but used to be, Nadine Gordimer, Jonathan Littell, Zeruiah Shalef, Helen Garner, Matthias Enard, David Sobel, Orlando Figes. And from Canada, it used to be Alice Munro, unfortunately no longer, but she used to be ours. Margaret Atwood still is, Miriam Toews, and Frances Itoné. And for Pieper, I published Ravi Haj. So that gives you a bit of an idea what we do at Berlin Verlag. We try to be reasonable in our choices. We try to buy books that stand the chance of getting sold, but not always. For instance, this year in fall, I'll publish a 1,500 pages Italian novel called La Scuola Cattolica, the Catholic school. And if I'm lucky, I'll get tons of reviews for it, but I'll certainly not make it a bestseller. So you can see that our choice is not so much a market choice, but much more a choice of literary claim. What we need is long-term thinking. We try to think award-wise. We try to think criticism-wise. We try to think about authors who might be invited to Germany, who might win and build a German public on the long term. All this is, of course, not a business where we can spend a lot of money in the first place. That's the downside to it. On the other side, I think to a lot of you who have small literary houses, what I'm telling here is good news, because there's not very, very many houses in Germany who buy that kind of thing at all. Claudia already showed you a bit the German publishing landscape. In the literary market, there are most of the houses that publish very literary fiction are owned by big groups. Most of them are in the hands of Random House or Holtzbrinck. There are a couple of very, very good family-run medium-sized houses like Hanse, like Klett-Cotta. There's more of them. I wrote it down somewhere. Where is it? There is Wagenbach, of course, Surkamp, Aufbau, Dumont. Those are still all old family-owned companies. I think your chances to place books there are excellent. Get information about them. And then there's a growing size of small, independent, very interesting publishers, especially also in Berlin. I'm really, really sorry, I can't really give you a lot of names and all that. This is not my generation anymore. I've kind of grown out of that scene, but I know it's there, and I know they're fantastic. And try to, if you go to Frankfurt, try to wander the hall with the small German publishers. It's not Hall 3, it's in Hall 4. And have a look around what they do. It's really invigorating and fantastic to see with what kind of enthusiasm and creativity they publish books, and they do it often so much better than we old farts do. It's really worth taking a look. One of the questions asked by Claudia to me is, how do we choose when we publish a book? I can actually only speak for myself. I get so many offers of manuscripts, it's depressing. But, of course, there are very powerful filters with which I work. My filters are literary agents, or rights persons, of course, the publishing houses, colleagues, a lot of colleague talk. A French colleague recommends me a Finnish book. That's valuable information. I'll listen to him very, very carefully. So all this networking things we've heard before is absolutely true. Publishing is 80% networking and 20% work. Scouts, literary scouts, this is true for the big houses. We are in the lucky position to have literary scouts filtering and reading a lot for us. We don't rely on them, but we listen to them, and they're very, very helpful. Then, of course, translators. Sometimes I've had a translator flag out a book to me and said, "This is really great, have a look," and I've listened to him or her, and I've followed his advice, and even more rarely readers. So there are all these filters, and we use them, and we need them, because otherwise we'd be swamped, wiped out by the sheer mass of manuscripts that we get every single day onto our desks. The market at the same time is shrinking. We've just been demonstrated that, and the market is shrinking, especially for literary fiction. The market is shrinking per annum. It's getting smaller and smaller. The attention of the German public is much less on books than it was 5 years ago, and let's not compare it with 15 years ago, when I was starting out as a junior editor at DTV in 1992. The minimum print run of a book like Women in Vietnam, and that would be short stories by unpublished writers from Vietnam nobody ever heard about, would be 40,000 copies. Yeah, those were the days. Those were the days in German publishing when you just bought everything you DTV brought out in a certain line every month. So interesting. Well, that's long gone. Now we are dealing with shrinking numbers of 20 to 25% per year. It's really scary. We're all trying to figure out if it will end, where it will end, and how to deal with it. The big groups don't seem to have any answers to that. The only people who seem to be able to juggle this are the smaller publishing houses. That's a very interesting trend. It's also true for the booksellers. The only group in the book-selling realm of the market who do not suffer heavily are very well-kept small bookstores where the owners do a lot of creative input and fantastic work with their customers. They grow. They have even increasing readership and more customers coming in. The big stores like Hugendubel and Thalia, that's our Waterstone or Borders, lose their customers to Amazon. And we are facing a market where we sell our books. I'm not talking ebooks here, I'm talking hardcover or paperback books to an extent of nearly 50% now to Amazon as a bookseller. Not so he'll be our biggest customer, and the amount of pressure they have on us, the amount of leverage they have on us is very, very scary. At the same time, of course, you talk to Amazon 1 hour and sell him, I don't know how many books for the next year, and I don't know how many hours you need to talk to all the tiny booksellers to persuade them to list your books. So he's also our most important client. But this is a very unpleasant situation, and this also forces us to focus even more on what we choose, why we choose it, what we publish, how to pitch it, first to the booksellers and to Amazon, and then to the public, how to market it, and it's not impossible to get attention, but it's getting harder and harder. And our lists, and that is not only my lists, are shrinking and shrinking, because what we all experience is that the so-called mid-list titles all drown like a stone. You can, if you're lucky, your lead titles will work to normal or even good extent, but all your mid-list titles will sell less than 1,200 copies, which is financial suicide in Germany, because normally you say if you don't sell 6,000, it's been a failure. This is very, very rough figures. Of course, there are different models of calculation. Of course, for a smaller company, even a sales figure of 2,000 can be enough return. But for us, that's kind of what's going on there. So I hope I haven't discouraged you by now, because in spite of all of this, we are still buying, and we're always on the lookout for new talent, always. Of course, I have to follow up on my wonderful, very successful, or not successful, but still wonderful existing authors. And I believe in not publishing a book, but I believe in publishing writers. I believe in following their work closely, and maybe not publish each of their book, but every book I see where I see that translation is what will work for this authors. Sometimes there's just books that in their own country will work very well, but maybe not in translation. Also, sometimes with not well-established authors, we like to skip the poetry section and focus on the novels for obvious economical reasons. But so if I buy a book from you, chances are I want to buy a writer. I will always look at what that person has done before. If it's a first book, of course, no need for that. But also writers that have never been published in Germany, that's not a reason against them. It can be a reason for them. It can be just a weird coincidence. My favorite example for that, it's not a Canadian, but a British example. When I joined Dumont Publishing, I was desperate because the list was empty. And I spent the summer browsing the lists of the literary prizes, the short lists and the long lists. And this way I discovered that Edward St. Aubin had never been published in Germany. And I translated him, and it became a huge success. It was beautiful. Before that, nobody had ever dared to do it. Why, I don't know. But the reason the fact that he had not only his then much talked about book, Mother's Milk, that was on the Booker shortlist, but 4 or 5 previous novels spoke for him, not against him. This is why I'm mentioning this. Having said this, your basic problem will be to get my attention. I am a very nice person here, and I'll smile to you all and say, yes, of course, send it. I'm so interested. It's wonderful. Sounds like it could be a book for me. And then you'll send it, and then you'll never hear from me. This is also because I get about 200 to 300 email a day. 1/3 of them is colleagues from Munich can dismiss that. 1/3 is unwanted stuff from anywhere, and 1/3 is manuscripts. That's still a lot. It's only me who has to read them all. So please be patient, and please don't give up on me. I might be very late, but I will get back to you if I want to buy the book. That's for sure. This is also why, and I say this, I know it's very, very rude to say that newsletters are not helpful. Not for me. You can imagine what I do with the about 40 to 60 newsletters I get every day. There's two choices. A, I read them very carefully and don't read a manuscript, or B, I delete them unread. This is exactly what I do. If you have a book for me, and I think this is true for a lot of my colleagues who buy fiction, don't send me a newsletter and think you've got your homework done. You haven't. I haven't even realized it exists. Write me a personalized email. Write, Eva-Marie, I have this book. It might be great on your list because it's just like, or because Actes Sud in France has just bought it, and I know you share taste with them, or whatever. Find a good reason, get my attention. 2 lines is enough, but it'll be 100% more effective than a newsletter or any standardized mail you send to everyone. I know this is a lot to ask, but if you want my attention, or give me a phone call. I might be very grumpy because you interrupt me in some horribly interesting copy edited whatever, but you'll have my attention. And attention is what you want in the swamp of unwanted information that is washing over every editor's head in every publishing house all over the world. I think I see Sarah nodding there. It's really hard to imagine how much it is sometimes, but it comes from everywhere. So, yeah, that's I've done all that. Okay. Yeah, personal email, I've done all this. Sorry, I'm a bit lost here. Let's call it my jet lag kicking in.
I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
When you go to Frankfurt, do you go and see the pavilion?
Two?
When you go to Frankfurt, do you visit the pavilion?
I'm coming to this a bit later, but to give you a frank answer, no. No. Also, for me, it would be too late. For me, it would be too late, because you need to sell me books now, not in 2 years' time when the pavilion is up there.
Do you see a difference if you publish a book from a country,
This will be my next big field I'm speaking about. I just want to make sure I don't. My criteria for choosing is very, very, very simple. It has to be high quality. The writing has to be excellent. The writing and the story that is told have to somehow be a perfect match, and I have to love it. And how do you know I love it? Trial and error. There's no other way, and communication is again the only way to find out. Also talking to other people. Who could I send this to in Germany? If I say I all the time, I also mean my many colleagues in Germany. We all function roughly the same way, and you'll hear people say, this is an Andrea Best book, or this is a Regina Kammerer book, or this is a Thomas Überhoff book. These are all editor colleagues, and it's a good thing to send it to them. Then, what can you lose? You can get no answer, but that's the worst thing that can happen to you. So I wish I had anything more specific to tell you what kind of book I'm looking for. But there really is no thing I can rule out. I can't say I would never publish a First Nations book. Why wouldn't I? It can be wonderful, and I think your Thomas King is one of the funniest and best writers I've ever read. So there is no real objective grid where you can say this yes, this no. Everything, if it's written in the right way, if it's talking eloquently from a world that is made understandable, is interesting, and can be a perfect book for the German market. The German public is a fairly cultured public also. That is one of the big distinctions, for example, in comparison to the American public, where you will find a small group of very cultured people on the east and west coast, but in between very few of them. So, but in Germany, Germans are, they nearly all speak English, they nearly all know how to read and write, they nearly all have finished high school, so there is a pretty good understanding for things, and even people who have not gone to university will read a lot of books. So people will understand. Don't be shy to suggest unusual or peculiar stuff, because it might be just perfect for Germany. Think Alice Munro. She's not an easy one. She was a huge success. Huge success. Now, let's come to the guest of honor thing. I'm so grateful for Kevin and his wonderful presentation, because this morning, talking to Claudia, I described a pretty glum scenery, why all of this was a lot of money for very little outcome. And I had really totally forgotten about New Zealand, who they just got it right. I remember this. I remember the enormous line in front of the New Zealandian pavilion. I can tell you that's a first. I've seen very, very empty pavilions with no guests at all. So the range from what you can get from here to there. I'm sure somebody will send a murder squad after me saying this, but if you want to look at a very bad example how to do it, it's France last year or Netherlands last year. This is really the way how not to do it. Don't invite just everyone. How do you want the poor journalists to find out what's interesting for them? What they'll do is they'll go for the flashy kind. They chose Laila Slimani, who is a wonderful woman, but not the best writer in France. There were, I think, in the end, something like 130 or 129 writers in the French writers delegation. They started with a list of 20, and then the pressure from all sides, from the publishing houses, the political sides, the provinces, got so high that they kept inviting and inviting and inviting more, and the result was nearly nil. Also, you've seen the photo of their stand. I thank you so much for showing it. You already have the Canadian book stand in Hall 6. You don't need a replica of that in the pavilion. Make a show of it. Show your cultural diversity. There are so many things that you and New Zealand have in common. A large First Nation population, an interesting First Nation population. Germans love that. They go for it. Your pavilion and show was a riot because of the Maori dancers. I remember people really queuing for that. You have an immigrant population with many, many different shades and layers that is very fascinating. You have this fantastic landscape, this wilderness, the animals, you have all that. And yeah, it's a very good idea to use that as your asset and to show all your cultural assets via your writers. And by this, I don't mean to invite politically correctly something from every group and every publishing house, but choose well and choose the best and those who are not yet well known. There's fair chances that Margaret Atwood gets invited anyway, and I'm saying that as her publisher. And if she can't come, it'll be very, very sad for us, but she's not new to the German public, or Alice Munro, or Jan Martel. They're great, but they don't need to be invited. We know them. Bring new people, bring fresh blood, bring us inspiration. Let us discover the new Canada. We don't need to make reconnection with the old Canada. I know I'm really crossing borders here. It's none of my business what you do in your guest of honor program, but that's my very personal advice, how to get the attention of the media. Because again, New Zealand got a media coverage that was just spectacular. Sure, it had to be with the facts, had to do with the fact that this was new grounds for us, and we knew very little about New Zealand, and it also collided very happily with the Lord of the Rings fascination of the fantastic fantasy landscapes over there. That's true, but still, if we know more about Canada than we do about New Zealand, but all we know about Canada is basically the white people's Canada, the Canada of Toronto, and already the Quebec is nearly a wilderness to us. We know it exists. We know that there's Montreal and there's a huge French-speaking population. But do we know many writers from there? I don't think so. I checked. I've tried to find out who of them got really famous. Maybe one or two. Not really. There's a lot to discover, and I want to encourage you to make us more aware of that side of Canada. And I think the chances are good that you will get the attention of the German publishing houses for that, because they also know that there's little hope in wanting to re-promote or reissue half-forgotten once in the 80s great Canadian writers, but there can be a fantastic opportunity to discover this most interesting, flashy, Muslim background, young, angry writer from, I don't know, Vancouver, wherever, I don't know. You know where these people live and what they have to say. This will be of a lot of interest to the German journalists and to the German TV. And if these people are well in self-promoting themselves, for instance, in German television, there's a lot of German television around the book fair. If you can get them in those programs, the public will be aware that they exist. I won't say that each of these authors will be a bestseller, but at least they'll be known and heard of. And if they write a second and a third book, you'll have a much easier time to persuade the German publisher to also do that. But yeah, please.
My question is, sometimes as publisher we know that some authors are not really good at doing events.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens.
What I'm trying to say is that we realize that how crucial it is to bring authors that are going to talk well, going to interact with. Should we be aware of that? If we have an author that is really good, but we know that they don't market themselves good, that they don't talk well, they're scared to be on TV, they're scared.
Yeah, you can work around that, to my experience. You don't put them in a talk show. You don't. You try to, if they're interviewed, you try to find a good environment for them. Don't do it on the fair with millions of people walking by. But you can work around that. You can have them less for the big, flashy things somewhere on the fair, but more for the small readings out of town or overall in Germany. I don't think that rules a writer out if he has a really fantastic oeuvre. There will be a place for them. It's not everything. So, was there any other crucial information that you really need to know? Sorry, I'm a bit distracted.
Actually, it's really good to hear what you have to say. It's really, really interesting to have your point of view.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah, we again to the guest of honor. Back to the guest of honor. My personal memory of one of the, apart from New Zealand, of course, of the best guest of honor result I've ever personally sensed was when the Netherlands were guest of honor like 20 years ago. It was in the 80s, and at the time, I think for financial reasons, they only brought maybe 10 writers, maybe it was more, maybe it was less, I don't know. But after that, there was a real Holland frenzy in Germany. Everybody started reading Harry Mulisch and Margriet de Moor and Nelleke Noordervliet and Cees Notenboom, and suddenly those people were everywhere. Nobody had ever heard of them before, apart from 3 specialists. And this was, I think, because there were only these 10 writers. They were really interesting people who had fantastic literary works standing behind them and that were really there to discover, and the German literary critics were on their knees. They wrote about nothing else than Dutch literature for many, many times. And I mean, Holland is a really tiny country. It's, and it's our neighbors, so we should know everything about them, but we don't. So all the better for you.
What about the branding of each country? Obviously you've seen it all because it's normally.
Yeah.
Is there any comment on that?
Yeah.
Because,
Well, this guest of honor thing can be a weird thing. I don't want to name any nations there, but there are nations who have no literature to speak of, no real literary scene, and then it all becomes a bit. Well, then it's really a representation of the culture, but then it's got nothing to do with us in the publishing industry, and that's why we sneer at it. It may have done wonders for all the other areas. I don't know about that, but then we think, well, that was, why would I want to publish a book just because it's from X, Y, Z, if it's just not any good? So this is not helpful for the publishing industry. This is all I can say there, and there are the branding. I think it's more important for the internal marketing of the thing inside your own country and towards the business partners in Germany than it is with the general public. I don't think the public really cares. The public will just decide in a blink of an eye if they're interested or not interested. And if they have a pavilion where everything's going on like New Zealand, they will want to get in. And if they have a pavilion with a lot of bookshelves, they will not want to go in. I think that's fairly easy. Any more questions? Attack me. Say I'm wrong, because I am in many, many ways.
on a B2B level, like at Frankfurt, for example, you were probably a very sought after person. Like, how many time slots would you have open for any of interested publishers here in the room? Or do you pre-select, or how do you, I mean, in very practical terms, like if anyone were to approach you,
Yeah.
what are the realistic chances of getting a meeting with you?
They're not unrealistic. I have 2.5 or 3 days reserved because my scouts will do my scheduling. That's my American, English, Italian, and French scout. They all get half a day. And so with me, the best idea is not to contact me in June, because then I have to wait for the scouts to do their work, but to contact me in, let's say, August, and ask me, do you have a meeting left? And I normally do, and I'm very happy to fill it up with people I haven't yet met, or with people I just like, and to see them again. And if you have a meeting with me, you already said everything that's really necessary, but I'll repeat it because it's so crucial. Don't swamp me with information. Don't read me your rights list. Tell me about the one book you have for me, or the 2 books you have for me, or say, this year I've got nothing to sell to you, but hey, how are your kids? Or this year I've got nothing to sell to you, but why don't we have a coffee together or chat? Or you say, this year I've got nothing new to sell to you, but I just thought about this backlist author, and why have you never looked at him? Something like that. If you read me your rights list, I'll fall asleep with my eyes wide open. Yeah.
How are you working with the German sub-agents? Are you seeing them on a regular basis?
Yeah.
Do you go on to
Yeah.
their portal to see what they're offering?
I never do that because I'm a lousy electronical person. But I, of course, as you imagine, I've known them for years and years and years, and actually we're quite close friends because either you like each other after 20 years of working together, or you hate each other.
Is there like
No, not really. Those who are left are all really nice. Yeah, it's good. And yeah, of course. And if they're in Berlin, they'll come to my office and we'll talk. And every book fair we schedule. The first thing I schedule is the meeting with the sub-agents in Frankfurt on a Friday or Saturday to do the follow-up of the fair, because when I was working in commercial publishing, I would have a meeting with them on Monday or on Tuesday to get the big books before the fair. Now, for literary publishing, the money is not big, so no urgency there. You talk to them at the end of the fair what actually is around, and they will also prioritize for you. They will tell you, and Nancy House told you about this. Actually, there is another book, I think, from their list you should focus more on because or whatever. So, yes, we have a very close working relationship, and they're a big, big, big help for me.
Just slightly different topic. Translators in Germany, they are not work for hire like they are here. They get paid a royalty, right?
They get a contract that they translate this and that work, and they get a rate per page, and they get a royalty rate in addition to that. Normally it starts when a book sells more than 5,000 copies. It all depends on the individual contract. And if a book becomes a bestseller, they can get up to 3% royalty, which is something you need to, or you want to know why we have very sharp borders of how high we can go in our royalty escalators. Everything more than 11% is just financial suicide, because by sales that high, the translator will get 3%, so that makes 14 all in all. That's really a lot. I think it's fair that translators get a share once a book becomes successful, but of course it's taking a little bit away from the author and from the original publisher.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? I'll be here all day this afternoon. I'll be here tomorrow, so talk to me.
Thank you so much, Eva-Marie. That was just fantastic. And as was said by Carolyn, I think it really has been helpful to have someone from the marketplace, our counterparts. So thank you so much, and lots of insights there.